Hello and welcome to Being Prodigy. Now put on your headphones and start learning. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description.
As colonial control over Indian trade tightened, the space within which Indian merchants could function became increasingly limited. They were barred from trading with Europe and manufactured goods, and had to export mostly raw materials and food grains, raw cotton, opium, wheat and indigo, required by the British. They were also gradually edged out of the shipping business. Till the First World War, European managing agencies in fact controlled a large sector of Indian industries. Three of the biggest ones were Bird Higglers and Company, Andrew Yule, and Jardine Skinner and Company. These agencies mobilized capital, set up joint stock companies and managed them. In most instances, Indian financiers provided the capital while the European agencies made all investment and business decisions. The European merchant industrialists had their own chambers of commerce which Indian businessmen were not allowed to join. Where did the workers come from? Factories needed workers. With the expansion of factories, this demand increased. In 1901, there were 584,000 workers in Indian factories. By 1946, the number was over 2,436,000. Where did the workers come from? In most industrial regions, workers came from the districts around. Peasants and artisans who found no work in the village went to the industrial centers in search of work. Over 50% workers in the Bombay cotton industries in 1911 came from the neighboring district of Ratnagiri, while the mills of Kanpur got most of their textile hands from the villages within the district of Kanpur. Most often millworkers moved between the village and the city, returning to their village homes during harvests and festivals. Over time, as news of employment spread, workers traveled great distances in the hope of work in the mills. From the United Provinces, for instance, they went to work in the textile mills of Bombay and in the jute mills of Calcutta. Getting jobs was always difficult. Even when mills multiplied and the demand for workers increased, the numbers seeking work were always more than the jobs available. Entry into the mills was also restricted. Industrialists usually employed a jobber to get new recruits. Very often the jobber was an old and trusted worker. He got people from his village, ensured them jobs, helped them settle in the city and provided them money in times of crisis. The jobber therefore became a person with some authority and power. He began demanding money and gifts for his favor and controlling the lives of workers. The number of factory workers increased over time. However, as you will see, they were a small proportion of the total industrial workforce. The peculiarities of industrial growth. European managing agencies, which dominated industrial production in India, were interested in certain kinds of products. They established tea and coffee plantations, acquiring land at cheap rates from the colonial government, and they invested in mining, indigo and jute. Most of these were products required primarily for export trade and not for sale in India. When Indian businessmen began setting up industries in the late 19th century, they avoided competing with Manchester goods in the Indian market. Since yarn was not an important part of British imports into India, the early cotton mills in India produced coarse cotton yarn, thread, rather than fabric. When yarn was imported, it was only of the superior variety. The yarn produced in Indian spinning mills was used by handloom weavers in India or exported to China.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support.
By the first decade of the 20th century, a series of changes affected the pattern of industrialization. As the Swadeshi movement gathered momentum, nationalists mobilized people to boycott foreign cloth. Industrial groups organized themselves to protect their collective interests, pressurizing the government to increase tariff protection and grant other concessions. From 1906, moreover, the export of Indian yarn to China declined since produced from Chinese and Japanese mills flooded the Chinese market. So industrialists in India began shifting from yarn to cloth production. Cotton piece goods production in India doubled between 1900 and 1912. Yet, till the First World War, industrial growth was slow. The war created a dramatically new situation. With British mills busy with war production to meet the needs of the army, Manchester imports into India declined. Suddenly, Indian mills had a vast home market to supply. As the war prolonged, Indian factories were called upon to supply war needs, jute bags, cloth for army uniforms, tents and leather boots, horse and mule saddles and a host of other items. New factories were set up and old ones ran multiple shifts. Many new workers were employed and everyone was made to work longer hours. Over the war years, industrial production boomed. After the war, Manchester could never recapture its old position in the Indian market. Unable to modernize and compete with the US, Germany and Japan, the economy of Britain crumbled after the war. Cotton production collapsed and exports of cotton cloth from Britain fell dramatically. Within the colonies, local industrialists gradually consolidated their position, substituting foreign manufacturers and capturing the home market. Small-scale industries predominate while factory industries grew steadily after the war. Large industries formed only a small segment of the economy. Most of them, about 67% in 1911, were located in Bengal and Bombay. Over the rest of the country, small-scale production continued to predominate. Only a small proportion of the total industrial labor force worked in registered factories. 5% in 1911 and 10% in 1931. The rest worked in small workshops and household units, often located in alleys and bylanes, invisible to the passerby. In fact, in some instances, handicrafts production actually expanded in the 20th century. This is true even in the case of the handloom sector that we have discussed. While cheap machine-made thread wiped out the spinning industry in the 19th century, the weavers survived, despite problems. In the 20th century, handloom cloth production expanded steadily, almost trebling between 1900 and 1940. How did this happen? This was partly because of technological changes. Handicrafts people adopt new technology if that helps them improve production without excessively pushing up costs. So, by the second decade of the 20th century, we find weavers using looms with a fly shuttle. This increased productivity per worker, speeded up production and reduced labor demand. By 1941, over 35% of handlooms in India were fitted with fly shuttles. In regions like Travancore, Madras, Mysore, Cochin, Bengal, the proportion was 70 to 80%. There were several other small innovations that helped weavers improve their productivity and compete with the mill sector. Certain groups of weavers were in a better position than others to survive the competition with mill industries. Amongst weavers, some produced coarse cloth while others wove finer varieties. The coarser cloth was bought by the poor and its demand fluctuated violently. In times of bad harvests and famines, when the rural poor had little to eat, and their cash income disappeared, they could not possibly buy cloth.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description, and please subscribe to show your support.
The demand for the finer varieties bought by the well-to-do was more stable. The rich could buy these even when the poor starved. Famines did not affect the sale of Banarasi or Balatari saris. Moreover, as you have seen, mills could not imitate specialized weaves. Saris with woven borders, or the famous lungas and handkerchiefs of Madras, could not be easily displaced by mill production. Weavers and other craftspeople who continued to expand production through the 20th century did not necessarily prosper. They lived hard lives and worked long hours. Very often the entire household, including all the women and children, had to work at various stages of the production process. But they were not simply remnants of past times in the age of factories. Their life and labor was integral to the process of industrialization. Market for goods. We have seen how British manufacturers attempted to take over the Indian market, and how Indian weavers and craftsmen, traders and industrialists resisted colonial controls, demanded tariff protection, created their own spaces, and tried to extend the market for their produce. But when new products are produced, people have to be persuaded to buy them. They have to feel like using the product. How was this done? One way in which new consumers are created is through advertisements. As you know, advertisements make products appear desirable and necessary. They try to shape the minds of people and create new needs. Today we live in a world where advertisements surround us. They appear in newspapers, magazines, hoardings, street walls, television screens. But if we look back into history, we find that from the very beginning of the industrial age, advertisements have played a part in expanding the markets for products and in shaping a new consumer culture. When Manchester industrialists began selling cloth in India, they put labels on the cloth bundles. The label was needed to make the place of manufacture and the name of the company familiar to the buyer. The label was also to be a mark of quality. When buyers saw "Made in Manchester" written in bold on the label, they were expected to feel confident about buying the cloth. But labels did not only carry words and texts. They also carried images and were very often beautifully illustrated. If we look at these old labels, we can have some idea of the mind of the manufacturers, their calculations, and the way they appealed to the people. Images of Indian gods and goddesses regularly appeared on these labels. It was as if the association with gods gave divine approval to the goods being sold. The imprinted image of Krishna or Saraswati was also intended to make the manufacture from a foreign land appear somewhat familiar to Indian people. By the late 19th century, manufacturers were printing calendars to popularize their products. Unlike newspapers and magazines, calendars were used even by people who could not read. They were hung in tea shops and in poor people's homes just as much as in offices and middle-class apartments. And those who hung the calendars had to see the advertisements, day after day, through the year. In these calendars, once again, we see the figures of gods being used to sell new products. Like the images of gods, figures of important personages, of emperors and nawabs, adorned advertisement and calendars. The message very often seemed to say, if you respect the royal figure, then respect this product. When the product was being used by kings, or produced under royal command, its quality could not be questioned. When Indian manufacturers advertised, the nationalist message was clear and loud. If you care for the nation, then buy products that Indians produce. Advertisements became a vehicle of the nationalist message of Swadeshi. Conclusion: clearly, the age of industries has meant major technological changes, growth of factories, and the making of a new industrial labor force. However, as you have seen, hand technology and small-scale production remained an important part of the industrial landscape.
This is Being Prodigy. To get special study material, just contact us through the link in the description. And please subscribe to show your support. Thank you and happy learning.